The last thing Zack remembered was falling off a cliff while hunting. The next time he opened his eyes, he was surrounded by women, and somehow, he was the only man left alive in the entire village. Zack's body ached, his head pounding like something inside it was trying to break free. He tried to sit up, but gentle hands pushed him back down. "Don't move," one of them whispered softly. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. Zack looked around. Faces. Dozens of them. All women. Watching him, smiling like they'd been waiting. "Where am I?" Zack asked, his voice dry. A woman stepped forward, older, confident. "You're safe," she said. "We found you at the bottom of the hill." Safe. The word didn't feel right, because as his eyes adjusted, he noticed something strange. There were no men. Not one. "Where are the men?" Zack asked. The women looked at each other, then one of them smiled. "We haven't seen a man in 40 years. Before we dive into this story, if you're new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this. And down in the comments, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? And what time is it right now? Are you watching from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, South Africa, Jamaica, or somewhere else entirely? It's always amazing seeing how far these stories travel, and how many people around the world are watching together. Now, let's get into the story. They fed him fresh food, warm, perfectly prepared, the kind of meal that takes thought and time. Meat that was tender in the way that only long, careful cooking produces. Vegetables that were seasoned just enough. Water that tasted cleaner than anything Zack remembered drinking in years. Too clean, too perfect. Everything presented like an offering, like someone had prepared for this day. Every time Zack tried to sit up, they were there, watching, helping, adjusting his blanket, refilling his cup, smiling, always smiling. "You fell from very high," one of them said. "It's a miracle you survived." Miracle, safe, lucky. All the right words, in all the right order, said by mouths that knew exactly when to use them. A person who has rehearsed comfort is more dangerous than a person who shows you none at all. As the hours passed, Zack let himself appear to recover. He let them think the food was working, let them think the warmth was loosening his suspicion. He smiled when they smiled. He thanked them when they brought him things. He looked like a man who was grateful to be alive. But his mind never stopped moving. He was cataloging everything. Every face, every routine, every time someone entered the room, and how long before someone else followed. He was building a map of this place from the inside of a room he hadn't yet been allowed to leave. The village was too quiet. Not the quiet of a peaceful place, not the quiet of rest. This was the quiet of a place where sound was managed, where noise was controlled, where everything that happened was permitted, and nothing happened that wasn't. No arguments drifting through the walls, no laughter from somewhere in the distance, no child crying, no dog barking. Nothing. A village with no natural noise is not a village living. It is a village performing. And then there was the way the houses looked. Zack could see them from the small window above his bed. Arranged in a pattern that was too precise, too deliberate. Like someone had designed this place from above before a single wall was built. Like function mattered more than how people naturally settle. And everywhere he looked. Women. Young. Old. But none of them looked aged by life the way people are supposed to. None of them carried the weight of decades in their faces the way 40 years should leave its mark. They were preserved, smooth, still. Like time had looked at this village and made a decision to slow down. Like something had struck a deal on their behalf. And deals like that always have a price. Always. The question is just who pays it. By the next morning, Zack insisted on walking. He said he needed air. Said his body healed better when it moved. Said sitting still made his head worse. All of it was true. None of it was the real reason. They hesitated. Just for a second. One beat too long before the agreement came. A normal person wouldn't have noticed. But Zack was not feeling normal. Zack was afraid, and afraid people notice everything. "I'm fine," he said, forcing the kind of smile that asks for nothing in return. Finally, they agreed. But not alone. Two of them followed him. Not close enough to seem like a guard. Not far enough to pretend they weren't one. That perfect middle distance that says we trust you while meaning we are watching every step. Zack wasn't walking freely. He was being walked. like something they weren't ready to let go of yet. He kept his pace casual, looked up at the trees like a man who appreciated nature, breathed deeply like someone grateful to be outside. But his eyes were doing something completely different. He was scanning, looking for tools that would suggest men had been here. Clothes hanging that were too large for a woman. Shoes near a doorway that didn't belong to anyone he had seen. Anything. Any trace. Any evidence that 40 years was a lie, and men had been here more recently than that. Nothing. Not a single trace. It was as if men had never touched this place at all. Like the village had been built around the idea of their absence. But then, he saw something. At the edge of the village, where the neat lines of the houses ended and the land began to slope downward toward the forest, there was a structure. Bigger than the houses around it, older. The kind of old that belongs to something that was built before the rest of the village, before the rules of this place were fully decided. And it was locked. A heavy bar across the outside of the door. Not locked to keep something out, locked to keep something in. Zack slowed down, let his eyes rest on it the way a curious person might, not the way a person building an escape plan does. "What's that?" he asked, gesturing toward it with a chin nod. The two women behind him stopped. Silence, not the pause of someone thinking, the pause of someone choosing. "Nothing important," one of them said, too quickly. The words arriving before the breath that should have carried them. "Can I see it?" Zack asked. They looked at each other. Again that glance, that silent agreement, that language with no words. "Another time," the older one said. Another time. Which meant not now, which meant never, which meant they had already decided what Zack was and wasn't allowed to know. As they turned him away from the structure and walked him back toward the center of the village, Zack let his gaze drop to the ground the way a man who isn't paying attention might. And that's when he saw them. Footprints, not small, not the kind that belonged to any woman he had seen here. These were heavy, deep, the kind of impression that came from weight and size, a larger frame, larger feet, a body that pressed into the earth with the kind of force only a man carries. And they were not old, they were fresh, the edges still crisp, the soil still dark and soft around the impression. Someone had been here hours ago, maybe less, fresh footprints, from a man, in a village that swore it hadn't seen one in 40 years. Zack kept walking, he didn't slow down, he didn't react, he kept the casual face in place, but inside, everything had just changed. Because if those footprints were real, and they were, then nothing they had told him was true. Not one word. Zack didn't say anything about the footprints. Not yet, not until he understood more. Instead, he did what he had been doing since the moment he woke up in this place. He pretended to be grateful, pretended to be healing, pretended that the food tasted like kindness and not control, pretended that the smiles felt warm and not like instructions. Because now he understood the stakes. Now he knew. They were lying. And whatever they were lying about was big enough to make a man disappear. Which meant Zack needed to be smarter than he had ever been in his life. If they were watching him, and they were, then he would watch them back. Not with the obvious gaze of suspicion, with the slow, patient attention of a man who learned to hunt by learning how prey moves. And what he noticed, as the day stretched on and the village went through the motions of ordinary life, was the children. A group of them sat under a wide tree at the far edge of the main path. They weren't playing, they weren't laughing or arguing or doing any of the things children are supposed to fill the world with. They were sitting still, watching Zack, with eyes that were too old for their faces. Zack forced a smile and walked toward them. He felt the two women behind him adjust, a slight tension, a change in their breathing, but they didn't stop him. Not yet. "Hey," he said softly, crouching to their level the way adults do when they want children to feel safe enough to speak. "What are your names?" The children looked at each other. That same glance, that same silent signal that seemed to run through everyone here like something in the water. Then one of them, a little girl sitting slightly apart from the rest, her hands folded neatly in her lap, looked directly at Zack. Not with the shyness of a child meeting a stranger, with recognition. "We know who you are," she said. Zack kept the smile in place even though something cold had just moved through him. "Oh yeah?" he said. "Who am I?" The girl tilted her head. considered him the way a much older person would, and then said 3 words that rearranged everything Zack thought he understood about this place. "You're the new one. Not the only one. The new one." New implies there were others. New implies a pattern. New implies this village has been here, doing this, for a very long time. Zack opened his mouth to respond, but one of the women stepped in immediately, her hand landing gently on his arm, her voice arriving like something pre-loaded and ready. "They like to imagine things," she said, smiling down at the children with an expression that was definitely not meant for them. It was meant for Zack. It was a warning dressed as an explanation. "You should rest, you're still healing," she added. "Still healing. Rest." These words again. Always circling back. Always steering him towards stillness. Always keeping him just weak enough. A person who keeps you healing forever never actually wants you well. Zack let them turn him away. He walked back the direction they pointed him. But just before the girl disappeared from his line of sight, he looked back. She wasn't watching the other children. She wasn't distracted by whatever children distract themselves with. She was staring directly at him. And just before the distance made it impossible to read her face, she mouthed something. Slowly, carefully, making sure every movement of her lips was clear. "Don't trust them." That night, Zack lay on the bed they had given him and stared at the ceiling. He didn't sleep. He didn't try to. Instead, he listened. To the village settling, to the sound of footsteps fading into houses, to the quiet that came after. The village was always too quiet during the day. But at night, it was different. At night, the silence wasn't empty. It had texture. It had direction. Like something was happening beneath the surface of it that Zack couldn't quite see. And then, he heard it. A sound. Low, rhythmic, coming from outside, from the center of the village, he thought. Almost like humming, but not the absent kind, not the sound a person makes when their mind is elsewhere. This was deliberate, this was shaped, this was a sound that knew exactly what it was doing. Zack sat up slowly. Every muscle in his body protested, but he moved anyway. Carefully, quietly. The kind of quiet that only works if you commit to it completely. He reached the window, pressed himself against the wall beside it first, then, slowly, turned to look. What he saw made his stomach drop through the floor. The women were gathered in the center of the village, dozens of them, standing in a perfect circle, moving slowly, swaying, almost, in complete unison. Every body moving in the same direction at the same moment, like they were controlled by a single mind. The humming was coming from all of them. Together, building, rising and falling in a pattern that felt ancient, like something that predated language, something that existed before people had words to describe what they were doing or why. And at the center of the circle, there was something covered with cloth. Long, still. Too still for an animal, too large for comfort. The older woman, the one who spoke first, the leader, the one with the authority in her voice that didn't need to announce itself, stepped forward. She raised her hands. The humming stopped. Instantly. Like cutting a wire. The silence that replaced it was the worst sound Zack had ever heard. She stood over the covered shape. She reached down. She began to pull the cloth back, and Zack leaned forward to see, and a hand closed around his shoulder from behind. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. He just stopped. Then, slowly, he turned. One of the women stood behind him. She was smiling, but this smile was nothing like the ones they had shown him all day. Those smiles were made of softness and warmth and practiced comfort. This one was made of something else entirely. "You shouldn't be awake," she said. The words were quiet, but they landed loud. She moved past him to the window, slowly, deliberately, and as she pulled it closed, Zack caught one last glimpse of the center of the circle. The cloth was fully pulled back now, and what was underneath it was not an animal. It was not a bundle of offerings. It was not anything Zack had hoped it would be. It was a man, lying still, and not a single woman in that circle looked surprised. Zack did not sleep that night. He lay in the dark and let the image replay in his mind until he had examined every detail of it. The circle, the chanting, the body, a man. So everything they told him was a lie. Not a small lie. Not the kind people tell to protect feelings or avoid uncomfortable conversations. A structural lie. A lie that had been built around him like a room. A lie that every single woman in this village was participating in. When every person in a place is committed to the same story, it stops being a lie and starts being a system, and you are already inside it. Morning came the way it always does, without asking permission, and with it the village resumed its performance of ordinary life. The same smiles, the same warm voices, the same food arriving at exactly the right time, like last night had never happened, like the circle and the body and the woman's hand on his shoulder in the dark were all things Zack had imagined. "Good morning," one of them said brightly, as she set a tray of food on the small table beside his bed. Zack looked at her face. Looked at it the way you look at a painting when you already know it isn't real, but you want to understand the brushwork. She had been in that circle last night. He was almost certain of it. And here she was, offering him breakfast with a smile that held nothing. The most frightening people are not the ones who are cruel. They are the ones who are cheerful about it. "I slept well," Zack said, returning the smile. He watched her face for the tell, the tiny shift behind the eyes that happens when someone hears a lie from someone they thought wasn't capable of lying. There, just a flicker, and then gone. "That's good," she said, and left. Zack needed to get back to that structure. The locked one, the one they had steered him away from too quickly, with too many words and not enough reason. He went that afternoon, taking his time getting there, letting his route look like wandering, the aimless walking of a man who was simply stretching his legs after days in bed. He crouched near the door, pressed his ear against the heavy wood, and heard breathing, faint, slow, but unmistakably there. Someone was on the other side of this door. Someone alive. Zack lowered his voice to almost nothing. "Hey, can you hear me?" Silence. Then movement, the sound of something shifting against the floor, and then a voice, dry, cracked, the voice of a person who hasn't had enough water or enough hope in a long time. "You need to run." The first words from the first honest person Zack had heard since he arrived in this village. Run. Before you understand enough to know it's already too late to run. "How long have you been in there?" Zack asked. A pause that lasted long enough to mean the man had genuinely lost track. "I don't know anymore." Another cough. Then, "They'll break you. They break all of us in the end." "What do you mean? How many of you are there?" The man on the other side of the door let out a sound that might have been a laugh once, before whatever happened to him had taken the humor out of it. "You think you're special? You think you're the first person to wake up in this village and wonder why there are no men?" A pause. "We all fell, or got lost, or were found. And every single one of us stayed. Stayed. Not chose to stay, not wanted to stay. Stayed, the way things stay when they have no other option left." "Listen to me," the man whispered, his voice suddenly sharper, more urgent. "Don't eat too much of the food, don't drink everything they give you. It does something to you. Makes you slow, makes you heavy. Cuts the edge off your thinking right when you need it most." Zack's mind went immediately to the meals. The warm food that arrived without being asked for. The water that tasted too clean, the way he had felt so comfortable since he arrived, so settled, so unlike a man in danger. He had been eating it. All of it, because it tasted like kindness, and he hadn't once questioned what else it might taste like. And then, footsteps. Close, too close, moving fast. The voice inside went silent in an instant. Zack straightened up, turned slowly. 3 women stood behind him, the older one in the center, and this time, the smiles were completely gone. She looked at him the way people look at a problem they have dealt with before and are prepared to deal with again. "You're not supposed to be here," she said. Her voice was calm, but it was the calm of someone who had stopped pretending. And that was the most terrifying thing Zack had experienced since he opened his eyes in this place. Because pretending was the only protection he had. And now they had stopped. They moved him. Not roughly. That was the thing that stayed with Zack the longest afterward. They were still gentle, still careful. Their hands still guided rather than pushed. Their voices still measured, still controlled. But this time, the warmth was completely gone from all of it. And what was left underneath was something Zack didn't have a word for yet. They took him to a smaller hut at the far edge of the village, away from the center, away from the paths where people moved throughout the day. Away from anything that might have helped him. Inside, a bed, a single small window, a wall, and nothing else. He stepped in, turned to speak. The door closed. Rest, one of them said from the other side. And then, the lock. That sound. The bolt sliding home from the outside. Such a small mechanical thing. Such a quiet, ordinary sound. But it is the loudest thing Zack had ever heard, because it meant everything he had been pretending wasn't true had just become completely, undeniably real. He went to the door, pushed it, pulled it, put his full weight against it. Nothing. He went to the window, too small. Not even close. He sat on the edge of the bed, put his hands on his knees, and breathed. Because panic burns energy. And energy was the only thing Zack had left that they hadn't taken yet. He was still sitting there, still and quiet, eyes on the floor, when he heard it. A soft sound near the window, not a knock. Smaller than that. Like a pebble against wood. He looked up, and there she was, the little girl, crouching just below the window ledge on the outside, her eyes just visible above the sill. Looking at him with an expression that was completely unlike anything else Zack had seen in this village. Not performed, not rehearsed, not part of any system, just afraid, and trying not to show it. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. Zack moved to the window as carefully as he could. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I figured that out." She glanced over her shoulder, then back at him. "They're watching you all the time now," she said. "Not just two of them. More." "Why are you helping me?" Zack asked. She was quiet for a moment, long enough that he thought she might leave. Then she said, "Because my father told me someone would come back. And when they did, I should help them." Her father had been in this village. Her father had been exactly where Zack was sitting right now. And her father had not made it out. "Your father was here?" Zack asked. She nodded once, small. "He was like you. They found him. They kept him." A pause that carried something heavy inside it. "He didn't survive the ritual." He didn't survive the ritual. The words landed in Zack's chest and stayed there. "What is the ritual?" he asked. He kept his voice low and even. The voice of a man who needed the answer more than he needed to react to it. The girl shook her head slightly. "I don't have much time," she whispered. "If they see me talking to you, they'll move me away from this part of the village, and I won't be able to come back." She looked over her shoulder again, then pressed closer to the wall. "They need men," she said. Her voice dropped even further. "Not just to have children. That's what they tell the younger ones here. But that's not all of it." Zack waited. "The village has a condition," she said slowly, searching for words that fit something she had grown up understanding but never been taught how to explain. "It stays the same. The women don't age the way they should. The children are born healthy. Nothing breaks down the way it does in normal places." "And that costs something?" Zack said. She looked at him. "It always costs something," she said. "Always costs something." That sentence is older than this village. Older than anything. The oldest rule there is. "Every few years," she continued, "they find someone. Someone like you. It's not always an accident. The hill, the fall. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes people are guided there without knowing it." Guided there. Zack thought about the hunting trip. About the route he had taken. About the way the path had seemed to narrow and the ground had seemed to slope before the edge appeared too suddenly. About how he hadn't seen the drop coming. About how strange that was for someone who had been hunting that terrain for years. He hadn't fallen by accident. He had been led to the edge by something he couldn't see. And he had never once questioned it. "They bring them in," she continued. "Make them comfortable, make them feel cared for. And then when the time is right, when he is weak enough and calm enough and has stopped looking for a way out, they begin the ritual." "What happens during it?" Zack asked. The girl looked down at the ground for a moment. When she looked back up, something in her face had shifted. Older. Heavier. "The ritual takes what the village needs from him. His strength. She paused. "His life force, the older women call it. Whatever it is that keeps the village the way it is, it comes from them. And the man doesn't survive it," she said simply. "None of them have." Silence. Zack looked at the floor, let the full picture form. Not a rescue, not charity, not a village of women who found an injured stranger and cared for him out of goodness. A harvest. He was a harvest. The food, the warmth, the smiles, the careful hands keeping him from sitting up too fast. All of it was maintenance. They weren't healing him. They were preparing him. When does it start? He asked. The girl glanced toward the center of the village, like she could hear something building from that direction even now. Soon, she said. You've already been here longer than most. They're ready. Is there a way out of this village? A beat of hesitation. Long enough to worry him. Then, there's a path. Behind the old structure. It leads into the forest. But, they watch it. At night. Always. During the day, someone is always close. When is the path unwatched? The girl met his eyes, and for the first time since she appeared at his window, he saw something other than fear in her face. Something that looked like grief. During the ritual, she said, when it starts, everyone goes to the center. That's the only time. Zack understood immediately. The only window of escape was during the ritual. The ritual that was designed to kill him. He would have to let it begin. Let them bring him to the center, let the circle close around him, and then run. And survive long enough for the path to be clear. The only way out was through the thing built to be his end. And he had to do it without them knowing he had a plan, because the moment they knew, it was over. Zack didn't ask the girl when it would happen. He didn't need to. The village told him. The day of the ritual felt different from the moment Zack's eyes opened that morning. The air had a density to it, a pressure, like before a storm, and everything the women did moved with a kind of quiet purpose that hadn't been there before. Fewer conversations. Less movement between the houses. The smiles were still there, but they were absent now. On the faces, but not behind the eyes. Everyone was somewhere else in their heads. Preparing for something. No food came that evening. No water. Just silence from the other side of the locked door. And Zack understood. They were fasting him. Keeping him empty and easy to manage for whatever came next. He sat on the edge of the bed. He did not pace. He did not rehearse. He just sat and let his body conserve what it had. The man behind the locked door had warned him. Don't let them weaken you. Zack had not eaten everything they brought since that conversation. He had eaten enough to avoid suspicion, and no more. He had poured water into the cracks in the wall when no one was watching. He had done everything he could to arrive at this moment, with his mind still sharp. He didn't know if it would be enough, but it was all he had. The footsteps came when the last of the light was gone. 3 sets. Measured. Deliberate. The lock turned. The door opened. 3 women stood in the frame. The leader in the center. All of them dressed differently than before. Something ceremonial about what they wore now. Something that removed any remaining pretense that this was ordinary. It's time, Zack, the leader said. His name. The first time any of them had used it since he arrived. And the way she said it, not warmly, not like a person addressing another person, made the hair on the back of his neck respond before the rest of him could. He nodded slowly. Stood. Let his face say what they needed to see. He walked like a man going to his end. He thought like a man who intended to have one. They walked him through the village, and this time, no one kept up appearances. The women who lined the path as he moved through it weren't smiling with warmth anymore. They were watching him with the focused attention of people who had been waiting a long time for this particular moment. The fire at the center of the village was already burning. The circle already formed. Dozens of women, standing in the same formation Zack had seen from his window that night, except this time he was not watching from a window. He was being walked into the center of it. He scanned quickly. The structure, at the far edge. Behind it, the path. The 2 women who usually stood near it were here, in the circle. Just like the girl said they would be. This was the window, the only one. And it was open right now. The circle closed around him. The humming began. That same low, structured sound, building the way water builds behind a dam. The leader stepped forward. She raised her hands and the humming lifted in response. She looked at Zack the way you look at something that was never a person to you. For 40 years we have endured, she began. For 40 years we have kept this place alive. And now, she stepped closer. The cycle continues. The circle tightened. Bodies pressing in. The humming rising to something that felt like pressure against Zack's chest. And then, at the edge of the gathered crowd, a small figure. The girl. Standing still while everything around her moved. Watching Zack with an expression that held 40 years of grief in a face that had barely had time to form. And she nodded once, small, almost invisible. That was all he needed. Zack moved. He shoved the woman directly beside him with everything he had left. The circle broke at that point, like a chain losing a link. The woman went down. The humming shattered into chaos. Screaming replaced it. Stop him. Don't let. He ran, straight toward the structure. His legs protesting, his lungs behind where they needed to be. But moving fast enough. The guards who had stood near the path were already turning from their places in the circle, but they were too far. Zack hit the gap before they could close it, slipped past the reaching hand, felt fingers graze his arm, and then he was through. The path opened in front of him, the forest beyond it, dark, dense, and the only thing between him and everything he had left behind before he fell off that cliff. He ran into it without slowing. Branches tore at his face. The ground was uneven beneath him. His chest was burning, his legs were threatening to give. But behind him, the screaming, and he ran toward the dark. And then, something ahead of him. Not behind, not the women chasing, something waiting in front of him. Movement in the dark. And a voice, quiet, flat, completely devoid of surprise, said, "You shouldn't have run." In front of him, not behind. The forest was never the way out. It was always just the next room. Zack stopped. His breathing came in hard pulls. Every instinct he had was screaming at him to keep moving, to push through whatever was in front of him and find the other side of this forest. But the voice, the way it had landed. Not chasing, not angry, not surprised. Waiting. His eyes adjusted to the dark, and the shapes emerged from between the trees. One, then two, then more. Men, but men who looked like they had been through something that had removed most of what makes a person look alive. Their bodies were thin, in the way that happens when something takes more from you than food ever replaces. Their eyes were present but hollow, the eyes of people who had stopped expecting things to be different. Their skin was pale in a way that didn't match the forest around them. Not dead, not alive. Somewhere the ritual had left them after it was done using them, discarded into the trees like something that had served its purpose. One of them stepped forward. The one who had spoken. "We didn't escape," he said. His voice was empty of everything except the words. "We were released. When the ritual was finished with us. When there was nothing left they needed." Zack looked at them, looked at what they were, looked at what they had become. "Why are you still here?" he asked. "Why didn't you leave the forest?" The man looked at him for a long moment. "We can't," he said. "This is as far as it goes." Behind Zack, the sound of the women entering the forest, spreading out, systematic, the way people search when they already know where the thing they're looking for ends up. Zack looked at the men, at their hollow eyes, at their thin hands, at the remnants of people who had arrived here exactly like he had and been broken down by exactly the same process. "Why not fight?" Zack said. The man gave a faint, fractured version of a smile. "We tried. Once. We didn't have enough left." He looked at Zack, and something shifted behind the hollow. Something that recognized what Zack still had that they no longer did. He still had fight in him. He hadn't been through the ritual yet. He was the only one among them who still had something to lose. The leader's voice cut through the trees from behind Zack. "You cannot leave. You know that, none of you can." The men around Zack shifted, not toward him, toward the sound. The one who had spoken clenched his fists, slowly, like a machine that had forgotten it had the ability to do that. "We tried before," he said quietly, "when we had nothing left to try with." He looked at Zack. "But he's still whole, and we have never had that before." A pause. "Run," the man said. "We'll hold them." It happened fast. The men moved toward the sound of the women with the desperation of people who had been holding on to that anger for a very long time and had finally been handed a reason to let it go. The women reacted. And for the first time, they weren't in control of what was happening around them. "Run!" And this time, Zack didn't hesitate for even a fraction of a second. He turned. He ran deeper into the forest, past the chaos, past the screaming, past all of it. His legs found something. Some reserve he hadn't known was still there, and he pushed, and pushed, and kept pushing, until the trees around him began to thin, and the darkness began to soften. And the open land appeared in front of him like a promise. He fell to his knees when he reached it, his lungs completely empty, his legs no longer able to argue. He looked back. The forest was gone, like it had folded itself up and put itself away. Like it had never been there at all. Weeks passed, then months. Zack found a road, then people, then the kind of ordinary life he thought he had lost forever. He didn't talk about the village. He tried to, in the beginning, tried to explain what had happened, what he had seen, what the structure was, and who the voice behind the door belonged to. But every time he got to the part about the circle, or the locked door, or the men in the forest, he could see the expression forming on the listener's face. The one that meant, I believe you believe this. But I don't believe this. So he stopped. The most dangerous silences are the ones people choose for themselves. Because no one else will be warned, and the village keeps operating. His body healed. The bruises faded, the ache behind his eyes slowly disappeared. But something else didn't heal. The feeling. It started small. A woman on a crowded street looking at him a half-second longer than strangers usually do. Someone smiling at him from across a room in a way that had no obvious cause. Small things. The kind of things a person who had been through what Zack had been through would tell themselves were paranoia. So he told himself that. For weeks, he told himself that. Until the night he stood in front of his bathroom mirror and noticed something on his chest that he had somehow never noticed before. A mark. Faint. Circular. Like a symbol. Not a scar exactly, but not entirely like skin either. Like something had been pressed into him at a depth that didn't heal the same way the surface does. He touched it, and something inside it responded. Not pain exactly. Something closer to recognition. The ritual didn't need to finish to leave something behind. It had started the moment Zack arrived, and the mark was proof that some part of it had already taken hold. 4 days later, he was walking alone at night. A route he took when he couldn't sleep. Familiar streets, familiar sounds. And then, not familiar. Low, rhythmic, humming. His body stopped before his mind gave the instruction. He turned. They were at the edge of the light, standing just where the darkness began, smiling, waiting, like they had never not been there. And the leader stepped forward. Her voice completely unchanged, like distance and time and Zack's escape from the circle were details that simply hadn't mattered to her plan. You didn't think, she said softly, that it would end that easily, did you? No. He hadn't thought that, he had hoped it, and hope in this story was always the most dangerous thing. Zack didn't run. His body had already made that decision for him. His legs, which had carried him out of the forest, which had found the open land, which had put months of ordinary life between him and the village, wouldn't move. Like they already knew. The mark on his chest flared, not slowly, sharp, sudden, like a key turning. Zack dropped to one knee. His hand went to his chest instinctively, pressed against the mark. The pain radiated outward from it in waves. Not the pain of injury, but the pain of something being activated. The leader stepped closer. She looked at him with the expression of someone watching an expected outcome arrive on schedule. You crossed the boundary, she said. That's all this is. You felt it because you went as far as the boundary allows. Boundary, she nodded. You were never outside, Zack. The boundary extends far beyond the village. Everything you experienced after you ran, the road, the people, the months of recovery, it was all inside it. He stared at her. The road. The people who looked at him with the polite, slightly confused expressions of strangers who didn't know what to do with a man who seemed shaken. The room he had been living in. The nights he had spent telling himself he was healing. All of it. Inside the boundary. All of it constructed. All of it managed. His freedom was the most carefully designed part of the trap. We don't just hold you here, she said. We let you go. We let you believe you escaped. We let you feel the relief of it, let you settle back into ordinary life. Why? The smile arrived. That same soft, practiced, terrifying smile. Because hope keeps you useful, she said. A man who has given up is a dull instrument. A man who believes he is free and then loses it again, that gives us everything we need. Hope keeps you useful. Read that again. Sit with it. Because it is not just the most frightening line in this story. It is the truest one. The humming started again. Not outside him this time. Inside his skull. Low and deliberate and growing louder with every breath. He fought it, pushed against it, tried to stand, tried to find the anger that had carried him through the forest. But the mark was doing something to the connection between what he wanted and what his body would agree to. And as the gap widened, as the humming swallowed the last clear space in his mind, the last thing he heard was her voice. Welcome back. Darkness. Then pain. Not the sharp pain of injury, the dull, deep pain of a body that has been somewhere it shouldn't have been and been returned to where it started. The pain of being reset. Zack's eyes opened slowly. Light came in blurry and then sharpened. Faces. Dozens of them. Women. Smiling. And here's where this story becomes something worse than horror. Because you know what comes next. And Zack doesn't. He tried to sit up. Gentle hands pushed him back down. Soft, careful, practiced. His body felt wrong. Heavier than it should. Slower than he remembered. His hands, when he looked at them, were thinner than they were supposed to be. His skin carried a pallor that hadn't been there before. Something had been taken. Not enough to finish him, just enough to begin. You're safe, a voice said. Zack knew that voice. He was certain of it. Certain the way you are certain about something that lives deeper than memory. He opened his mouth to say so. To warn someone. To tell them he had been here before, that this was the beginning of something terrible, that he knew what was in the locked structure and what the humming meant at night. And the memory slipped. Not suddenly. The way sand slips through a fist. Slowly. Grain by grain. Each detail releasing its hold on him as he tried to grip it. The circle. The girl. The man behind the door. The mark on his chest. All of it softening, fading, becoming the texture of something he couldn't quite place. This is how it works. Not just trapping the body. Resetting the mind. Over and over and over. Until there's nothing left that remembers enough to resist. You fell, she continued, her voice warm and practiced and completely committed to the performance. But we found you. You're safe now. Zack looked around, at the faces, at the smiles, at the hands ready to help him if he tried to sit up too fast. Something about this felt wrong. He couldn't say why, he couldn't name it. He could only feel it the way you feel something in a dream just before the dream changes. And then, at the edge of the gathered faces, a girl, standing apart from the rest, not smiling, just watching him, with eyes that were older than her face, with an expression that looked like grief, dressed as patience. Their eyes met. She said something. He couldn't hear it over the sound of the women around him, but he watched her lips. You're the new one. Zack looked at her, and tried, really tried, to understand why those 3 words felt important, why they felt like something he should hold on to, why his chest tightened at the sound of them, even though he couldn't hear her. But the memory kept slipping, and the smiles kept coming, and the gentle hands adjusted the blanket around him, and Zack didn't understand what she meant. The loop was complete, and it would begin again, and no one was coming. Now here's what this story is actually about. We talk a lot about psychological manipulation, about control, about the systems that hold people in place, not with chains, not with walls, but with comfort, with food, with warmth, with the right words said at the right time by the right face, with the illusion of care. The most dangerous cages are the ones that feel like homes, because when something feels like safety, your body relaxes, your guard goes down. You start to eat the food without asking what's in it. You start to accept the word safe without checking if the door behind you is still open. And the most effective lies are the ones that keep you calm enough to stop looking around. The entire system in this story was built on one principle. Give Zack just enough to keep him cooperative. And it worked. Every single time. Hope keeps you useful. That sentence is the heart of this story. Because hope is the thing that made Zack eat the food, accept the comfort, believe the escape was real. Hope is what kept him inside the boundary even when he thought he was miles from it. This story is fiction, but what it describes is older than any village. There are people and systems in this world that operate on exactly this principle. Keep someone just comfortable enough. Keep them just hopeful enough. Give them just enough freedom to believe in it. And they will walk back to the center of the circle on their own. The question Zack's story leaves behind is not a horror question. It is a real one. How do you know when the freedom you're feeling is real? If you made it this far, you just sat through one of the most unsettling stories on this channel. And you stayed. That means something. If you're new here, this is what we do. We tell stories that spark your imagination and keep you thinking long after the video ends. So like this video, share it with someone who loves a story that makes them think, and subscribe so you never miss what's coming next. And I need you to drop a comment right now. Where are you watching from and what time is it? Are you in the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Jamaica, South Africa, Kenya, or somewhere else entirely? Every single time I read those comments, it blows my mind how far these stories travels around the world. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.